Hi everyone, hope you guys are all having a great day today. In today's video, I'm going to cover the whole entire market in terms of Dow Jones, NASDAQ, and S&P 500, including investor sentiment and the economic calendar, technicals, all that stuff. Hopefully you guys do enjoy the video. And then I do post these videos out weekly. This is the whole entire week. So if you want to be notified when I do upload the next video, consider following and subscribing so you'll be notified when I do. Now, in terms of investor sentiment, it has dropped down drastically. This was on February 5th, 2025. In terms of investor sentiment, it came in at 33.3%. Now, that is lower than a historical average. Again, this is 33.3% in terms of the bullish case in investor sentiment, and it is lower than historical average at 37.5%. And then the bearish sentiment has increased substantially at 42.9% versus the last previous week, which was at 34%. And by the way, the bullish case too, a little bit jumping around, sorry about that. It was at 41%, and we've seen it was at 43.4, 41%. The prior weeks, and obviously substantially dropped, and the bearish case has been increasing from the prior weeks and higher than historical average at 31%. So 31% historical average, 42.9% for February 5th. 2025. The reason why I'm pretty much mentioning this date quite a bit actually is because this is even after the case where Trump stated that he will pause tariffs for Canada and Mexico, but China still tariffs is not paused, right, in terms of it happening and all stuff, right? So the bullish case has significantly dropped for that case, and to each their own in terms of viewpoints for that. But in terms of the economic calendar, also mixed in with this is a pretty eventful week. The reason why I state that is because for Wednesday, we have CPI inflation numbers. On Thursday, we have PPI inflation numbers. And then we have a lot of Feds talking, including Jerome Powell talking on Tuesday. But for the economic calendar, those are the major hits. But I'll get back to them. I'm going to get to technicals and then come back to economic calendar towards the end. And the reason why I'm stating this as well is because in terms of indications for the S&P, NASDAQ, and Dow Jones, it's actually kind of showing to the downside. I personally would expect the markets to go up. Personally, that's just my opinion. But the problem is everything's kind of, for the most part, showing some headwinds coming up. That's the problem. So we're going to be looking at ETF SPY, ETF for the S&P 500. Same thing, just different ratio. Closed at $677, or $600.77. And like I've shown in the past, we have an upward trend resistance line, upward trend support level, dating back since 2010. And then two major crashes, upward trend support level, but until time will tell, until we get down to that level and see, maybe we'll bounce off it, which coincides with the 5-year chart, I believe, 100-day moving average, just clean. So potentially could be a bounce one day, but we'll see. Now we're right now in the mid zone. We've had times we were in the mid zone and dropped a little bit above actually the mid zone right now for the time being. But the problem is if we go to the 1-year chart, we see right here, MACD line is still in the bullish zone hypothetically, but it looks like it's going to cross down to the bearish zone soon. So if that is the case, then technically we have downside, but we are in the 50-day moving average area within the 1-year chart, and then followed by the 100-day moving average as well. And these averages, if you're looking at the price points, if you're specifically looking at SPY, again, it's just different ratio versus the S&P 500, you're looking at price point $598.41, and then $588.88 for the 100-day moving average. But the thing is too, even if you look at that, you look at the 5-year chart, we're in the bearish movement for the MACD line and still relatively strong. And then there was also one thing for the 1-year chart I forgot to mention. The volume has increased, but it's more on the selling side, obviously, right? Red candle tick, but still right about here with the volume, increased selling. So that's why personally I think it's going to cross over to the bearish movement, and we have some headwinds coming up, it looks like, for the time being, especially within this week with the CPI and PPI inflations coming out. Plus a lot of Feds are talking in terms of this week. I believe it was a Tuesday for the most part, Jerome Powell and all stuff. So it's going to be potentially an eventful week, potentially, we'll see. But it looks like some headwinds could be coming up. And then downside with the 5-year chart, the potentially reduced volume on the buying side on the 5-year data points. But we won't know until the next data point comes in, and we'll see has it truly decreased, or is it actually just still loading, not loading in, but more data is collected within the time frame, time zone, right, interval. But we'll see. But then all chart relatively, we see an arch coming down, relatively still same. Potentially we could see times like, for example, this was a little bit of a flat line and then still continuing to the upside. Are we going to see the same thing, or are we going to see an arch down? We do see potential crossover a little bit longer term because of the all chart crossover to downside bearish movement. Personally, in my opinion, I don't think that will be the case. I am in favor of the administration that is in right now in terms of for the economics that will be coming in. I think it should be stronger economics And if that is the case, then the markets should rally up at one point, personally, but that's just my opinion. By the way, I'm not a professional, so please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling, just for entertainment purposes. And then for QQQ, ETF for NASDAQ, same thing, just different ratio, just like the S&P 500 with the SPY. And we have the upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010 as well. Upward trend support level dating back since 2010. The reason I mentioned this, obviously there's been breakouts, stuff like that, and then resistance levels that we've seen. But if you look at the 1 year chart, and let me just close this off a little bit, we have an upward trend resistance line dating back to 2010, like I stated, and we're pretty much within that zone. Now, obviously, there's a couple, my lines are not necessarily perfect, but it still does adhere to that line. We've seen bounce off supports as well, and then massive drop, but still bounce off support nonetheless. We're within that range where we could potentially bounce off it still, especially with the 50-day moving average on the 1 year chart, right? But the problem is, just like the S&P 500, we've seen a volume into uptick, but more on the selling side. And the MACD line looks like wants to drop down to the bearish movement, even though it's in the bullish movement for the time being, but arching down to the bearish movement. But we've seen a short-lived bearish movement right about here, and then we went up regardless, right? But we'll see how it goes, I would say, but there is a potential bounce within the zone. And then if this line is adhered to with the upward trend resistance line dating back to 2010, you're looking at potentially bounce at somewhere between the range of $518, $517, $519, give or take. Currently, we're at $522.92 for ETF QQQ, ETF for NASDAQ. And then the moving average, in terms of the 50-day moving average for the 1 year chart, you're looking at $520.31 for the time being. This is just moving average. Now, for the 5 year chart, it is in the bearish movement, just like the S&P 500, and further downside potentially. Oh, and then also one thing for the 1 year chart, in case you're thinking we're going to come down to the 100-day moving average for the 1 year chart, you're looking at support at $506.69. Now, for the 5 year chart, like I stated, further downsides coming potentially, and just like the S&P, potentially lower volume buying, but we have to wait until the next data point to see if this is truly lowered volume coming in on the buy side overall. But nonetheless, it is volume buying on the 5 year chart, right? Now, in terms of the potential bounce off, like we've seen back here in August of 2024, off the 50-day moving average for the 5 year chart, you're looking at a price point of potentially at $478.61. Again, that's $478.61. The only problem is, personally, I do not think that's going to be the case. I think things will turn around at one point, but again, just showing the data is potentially showing more downside, just FYI, regardless of my opinion. Now, in terms of all charts showing the same thing, potentially arching down, but not as strong as the S&P. The S&P was personally showing a little bit more strength to the downside, but the NASDAQ is just following suit as well. Now, the Dow Jones is pretty interesting actually, because for the 1 year chart, it is pretty much, to me, more stronger than all of them to the downside potentially. But the Dow Jones did show strength before to bouncing off these moving averages a little bit. And if that is the case, 50-day moving average for a 1 year chart, you're looking at, actually first, we closed at 44,303 points. And then the 50-day moving average for the 1 year chart is at 43,787 points. And then the 100-day moving average, in case you couldn't think going to go down to that, is about 43,237 points. Now, if you look at the 5 year chart, just like the S&P and NASDAQ, it is in the bearish case, but interesting enough, we wanted to cross over to a bullish movement. We saw a massive uptick of greens, retesting the all-time high, by the way. The previous all-time high was somewhere in the ballpark of December 2024, and you could see zoomed out right about here. Again, the Dow Jones was interesting because it was showing strong growth to the upside, right? A little bit more condensed in terms of companies, right? It's only just 30 companies versus the S&P, which is 500 companies, but still, it was retesting the all-time highs previously, right? We've seen it retesting the all-time high zone previously, but it looks like it retested, could not necessarily make it, and then this curvature to the downside could mean further bearish movement to the downside, continuous, especially with the 1 year chart showing strong potential downside curvature to the downside and converting to bounce off potential support of the 50-day and 100-day moving average with this red candle here as well. Now, in the alt chart, it's pretty much showing the S&P and NASDAQ, and then a little bit of a curvature to the downside, but I would not say as strong as the S&P and NASDAQ. But that's just my personal opinion from this data points. You can see, again, curvature, but not necessarily as strong from my perception. Now, in terms of the economic calendar overall, I'm just going to go through them both points. On Monday, February 10th, we have nothing scheduled. And then for the Feds, they will be talking on this day, but I'll just go through it still. Tuesday, February 11th at 6 a.m., we have NFIB optimism index for the month of January. Previously it was at 105.1. And then at 8:50 a.m. we have Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack speak. 10 a.m. we have Fed Chair Jerome Powell testifies to Congress. I might be live streaming on my channel, so if you want to be notified when I do, consider following and subscribing. Again, that is on the Tuesday. At 10 a.m. we have San Francisco Fed President Daly speak. And then 3:30 p.m. we have New York Fed President William speak. 3:30 p.m. as well, we have Fed Governor Michelle Bowman speak. And then on Wednesday, February 12th, which is an eventful day, not necessarily eventful, but given the tariffs, all that stuff, the Fed speaking, plus the Fed's basically saying they want to slow down given the administration that has come in. They're expecting inflation to go up. So essentially, they're basically saying they're waiting for the data points to come in. But the thing is with the data points, they just came in, so it's not going to really reflect much anyway. But they are moving fast in terms of this administration. For example, the less printing money, in my opinion, inflation is really just by printing money. And the less printing of money, the less the inflation will go up as drastic in a way, if that makes sense. And they're cutting government spending at a decent rate right now, it looks like. And if that is the case, I would assume there will be less printing of money coming in. So if that is the case, then inflation should come down, hypothetically, in theory, right? But for the time being, we're going to have to assess it and see how it is, and so on and so forth. So at 8:30 a.m., we have Consumer Price Index for the month of January. Previously, it was 0.4. This time around, they're expecting 0.3, so a slight decrease. And then they have CPI year over year, previously 2.9. This time around, they're expecting 2.8, so a slight decrease as well. Core CPI, which is the one that they essentially look at for the most, has energy removed because energy is so volatile. And previously, this is for the month of January, previously 0.3. This time around, they're expecting 0.3, so pretty much flatline. And then core CPI year over year as well, looked at for the most part as well because energy is removed. Previously 3.2. This time around, expecting 3.1. So for CPI, Consumer Price Index, they're expecting slight decrease, or if not flatline for the most part, which is pretty good. Then at 10 a.m., we also have Fed Chair Jerome Powell testify to Congress as well. So he's speaking 2 days back to back for the most part. And then 3:30 p.m., we have New York Fed President William speak. Then at 2 p.m., we have Atlanta Fed President Bostic speak, as well as Monthly U.S. federal budget for the month of January. Previously, it was negative 22 billion. And at 5:05 p.m., we have Fed Governor Christopher Waller speak. Then on Thursday, February 13th, at 8:30 a.m., we have initial jobless claims for February 8th. Previously, it's 219,000. And then as well as Producer Price Index. So inflation numbers in terms of month of January, it was previously 0.2. This time around, they're expecting 0.3, so a slight increase. And then at 8:30 a.m., for continuation, we have Core PPI for the month of January, previously 0.1. Then PPI year over year, previously was 3.3%. And then Core PPI year over year at 3.3%. Then for Friday, February 14th, 8:30 a.m., we have Import Price Index for the month of January, previously 0.1. This time around, expecting 0.4, so slight increase. And then Import Price Index minus fuel for the month of January, U.S. retail sales, retail sales minus autos. And then at 9:15 a.m., we have industrial production, as well capacity utilization. And then 10 a.m., we have business inventories for the month of December. And then at 3 p.m., we have Dallas Fed President Logan speak. So pretty jam-packed week. We'll see what happens overall. But again, indications, for example, investor sentiment is less bullish. Way less bullish. I couldn't even spin a positive light to it because the investor sentiment is predominantly bearish overall, right? Strong bearish past historical averages. And then the bullish sentiment is lower than historical averages. And then it's obviously outweighed by the bearish sentiment. So there's that. So bearish sentiment overall, and plus indications are pointing to the downside potentially. So and plus an eventful week with inflation numbers coming in. So we'll see, be on the lookout for everything. And hopefully you guys do well in terms of trading the market overall for this week. Thanks again for watching. I do appreciate it. If you found it beneficial towards the end, consider dropping a like. It does help with the channel. So thank you so much for that. I'll try to live stream as much as I can in terms of Jerome Powell's talks, in terms of the Congress speeches and all stuff, testifies. I'll do my best. But if you want to be notified when I do upload those videos, my next video, weekly videos, and when I live stream those events, consider following and subscribing to be notified when I do. Thanks again for watching. Take care. God bless and peace.